On this episode of the ABB podcast, we have come all the way here to Ottawa, Ontario to sit down with Mr. Mark Monahan from the RBC Blues Festival. How's it going, Mark?
Excellent.
Thanks for having me in your beautiful office, by the way.
Thank you.
I can't wait till we get to the part where we talk about the creation of this place, because that's an interesting story in and of itself. But we'll start the way I start with all of my guests. I want to know about the house you grew up in. I want to hear about mom and dad, brothers and sisters, all of that stuff.
Well, I'm an Ottawa, not born in Ottawa, but an Ottawa bred guy. Actually, my dad was in the army, and I was actually born in Fort Churchill, Manitoba.
Oh, okay.
My birthplace has been wiped out. It was an army base.
Oh, okay.
Which is not there anymore. But I moved to Ottawa when I was 2. So
pretty much your whole life. Yeah.
But yeah, I grew up in the east end of Ottawa. Eventually sort of moved more central. I went to Ridgemont High School, eventually to Carleton University.
So everything, you just stayed here.
Yeah, I just stayed here, and honestly, sort of one thing led to another, and I really didn't have a reason to ever move off.
Mm-hmm. When you said dad was in the army,
yeah,
what did he do in the army?
He was in the medical corps.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had smart dad then, not just army brat dad.
Yeah, my dad was originally from Peterborough. Joined the army to pay for his medical degree,
mm-hmm.
and then stayed in the army. And actually, his last posting was when we moved to Ottawa.
Okay.
In the mid '60s. And he got out and went into private practice at that time.
Was military ever an idea for you?
Not really. I wasn't overly drawn to the military, but I was always a creative business kind of interested guy, and loved what my dad did, but had no interest really in going into medicine.
Right. Did he consider himself, because it's weird when you talk about like the medical side of being in the army, did he consider himself like a doctor, a medic, or did he consider himself a soldier first?
You know what? I think he was more interested in the medical side of it, and that's probably one of the reasons he got out. I think he had had enough of moving around,
mm-hmm.
the army life of being, uprooted every few years, and really wanted to settle down. He had 5 kids. I was the 4th.
Okay.
So it was time, I think, at that time.
Right.
And my mother as well really wanted to set some roots up, and Ottawa seemed like a good place to do that.
Was it the stereotypical sort of like strict army dad thing, or was he a little easier than that?
My dad was not that strict.
I got a feeling it wasn't.
Yeah, he was a smart guy, generally interested in the arts, and not was not a musician or anything like that,
mm-hmm.
But very supportive. I have a brother who's in the arts. He's a composer, musician, sound sculpturist, and so he went, that route.
That's a really interesting route too, because that's one of the unusual routes for musicians. It's not the ones that you know of right away.
Right.
It's okay. I want to hear more about that, but what I'm trying to get at here, when you had mom and dad around, you said you were one of 4?
One of 5.
One of 5.
Yeah.
Everybody creative? Everybody have some sort of, or is it just?
Some of us. The one rule in the house was that you had to take 2 years of some sort of music lessons.
That was a rule.
That was a rule.
Okay.
So all of us, basically 3 of us took piano lessons. 1 took guitar lessons.
Right.
And my younger sister, she took piano as well. But I was one of the only ones that continued.
Okay.
With the piano lessons because I was interested.
Mm-hmm.
So the others really didn't pick up on it. So my parents, not being musical, thought that was important, at least to give us, an opportunity to be exposed to it.
It's interesting. Did you ever talk to them, like as an adult, about that decision?
You know what? I talked to them. My mom really was sort of the pusher on that.
Okay.
And, she just felt it was. She loved music.
Right.
Didn't play music, but she loved it, and she just thought it was great to have kids who could play.
That's amazing. So college, you said you went to Carleton.
Went to Carleton.
What did you take when you went to university?
I was an early mass communications major. So, and actually they're just celebrating the 40th anniversary. It was right around the time I started, was 1980. So
that's interesting. Do you have any, because you said you were you were one of the early students in that program, do you have any sort of like understanding of how the program came about for that timing?
My understanding is that Carleton had a very strong journalism program.
Okay. Yeah.
Always did.
Yep.
But there were a lot of people who went into journalism who really didn't want to be a journalist.
Okay, yeah, let me walk you down that story. Yeah, okay.
And I think what they did is they thought there was an opportunity here to cater to those people who had an interest in the media.
Yep.
And so that was the precursor to their media studies program.
Right.
Which I think now is media and communication studies. So I think it was a way to accommodate those folks that really didn't want to be a hardcore journalist, but still were interested in the media.
It's interesting because that early on, when you found that program, did you have any idea that was a thing you were interested in, or does it just it existing, was it kind of a light for you?
I was in a general arts program.
Okay. And
taking a general BA and rooting around for something that I had an interest in. Honestly, that probably wasn't too hard. I wasn't, didn't want to go into science, right. Biology or something. So I thought, geez, I toyed around with economics, but again, I wasn't in a commerce degree. Right. So I thought, geez, this is interesting. I can get into this, and this will be a nice way to, go to school.
Do you still, because I mean, obviously now you're at a point where what you learned in college has become your life, basically, an extension of it. Do you still look back on individual lessons? Like, are there things that you take away from those specific days that you still use day to day when you're doing what you're doing?
The interesting thing is, last year, the folks at Carleton, through their agency, contacted me and said, do you want to help us out to celebrate the 40th anniversary? And I said, well, I never graduated. And they said, well, are you interested in graduating? And I said, of course. So I'm about to finish the final course that will allow me to graduate this June. So 40 years later.
That's amazing.
So your question is, I've been studying and taking some third-year courses around qualitative and quantitative research, which actually is quite interesting. Yep. And has a lot of application in what I'm doing right now. So it's been interesting to go back to academia and actually have a practical purpose for it.
Yeah, because you have a completely different perspective on it. Like when you're coming up as a kid, this is all the crap you're going to do one day. But now you actually know how it works and have like applicable knowledge to the stuff that's coming at you.
Exactly.
Do you, because you're in there with other college kids, right? Did those college kids doing what you're doing know who you are?
No, I just am a guy sitting in the lecture hall. And
right.
What I'm surprised about actually is I'm taking a third-year course. There's over 150 people in the course. So when I was going to university, by the time you got to third year, you're lucky to have 30 people.
Yeah.
Right? 167 people in a third. Like, to me, like, again, it's not that hard to be anonymous.
Oh yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I guess so, right? I never thought about it that way. Because my experience too is the exact same thing that you're talking about. I think like first year in journalism was like we had 40, 50 people by the time you got to the end, and I didn't make it. By the time you got to the end, you were down to like 10 or 15 at best, right?
Yeah.
So there's no anonymity there. How many years in university? Was it a 4-year degree?
4 years, yeah.
Where does business come in? Because I'm guessing you were the type of person that like started dipping into business stuff pretty early, like through those days, maybe. Even.
I actually, I was always into music, so I was, in high school, played the French horn and was in the barbershop quartet.
Oh,
and,
nice.
All like so had this great.
I want to see you with a wicker hat on so bad.
And the armband.
That's it.
But what was interesting is that everyone, that takes music probably as a young kid, often at some point has ambitions of being a musician.
Yep. Fancy that.
So as did I. But around the middle of high school sort of thing, or towards the end, I realized, you know what? I'm not going to make it as a musician. I really like it.
Right.
But I don't see myself, as doing this as a career. And so I thought, I've got a real interest into the mechanics of how music works and the whole business side. That's when I started to develop the business interests.
Okay.
Of, what would it be like if I wanted to be in the music business?
So your introduction to business, period, was in the idea of the music business.
It was.
Okay. That's really interesting. Do you remember your first sort of like musical business venture?
Well, I'm going to say music or entertainment.
Yeah. I kind of lump it all together as well.
So when I was in university, I was the chair or whatever of the theater company.
Okay.
It was an extracurricular thing. And in the last year of university, a buddy of mine and I, we started a company called Eddie May Murder Mysteries, and it was based on this idea of murder mystery weekends.
Oh, like the full weekends?
Full weekends.
Oh, nice.
We had been approached in the very end of that year to try and mount these things out at an inn near Osgood. Okay. Which we did, and we started a business in 1984, and we created this company, the first in Canada, one of the first in North America, to run these murder mystery weekends. Subsequently took off, and we started doing murder mystery trains. We were running them to Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec City.
Wow!
We created a franchise, and so this was one of the things that started right out of university.
Let me walk you through that a little bit. So you said somebody approached you to do these initially, right? So your first one is what, like a single weekend, that kind of idea?
It was, again, the analogy was, okay, Murder on the Orient Express.
Mm-hmm.
This guy who approached us had just bought an inn out near Osgood, and he was a British professor at Ottawa U, and happened to phone up the Sock and Buskin Theatre Company, and I happened to pick up the phone and said, hey, I've heard about this Murder on the Orient Express, and you do this murder mystery, and you go to a weekend, and Bill Morrison and I, my partner at the time, said, this is amazing. We can do this. So we started writing murder mysteries, dreaming up how we would do it.
Right.
And that's really what started my whole.
And you developed the stories yourself? You didn't just find somewhere where they were not posted online at the time?
We just wrote. We came up with, a creative plot, and then figured out, how we would stage it, and because we're in the theater business.
Yeah.
So it fit right in.
Of course. It's incredible. So, where does the idea to start building? Not the idea, but I don't know, for lack of a better term, where do the balls come to take that and be like, no, now we're going to go approach Via, or I'm assuming Via, but whoever the train is, to take it that way? Because it's one thing to have an idea like that walk into the door for you.
Yeah.
It's another thing to execute it. It's a much different thing to then take that idea and expand on it. Yeah.
I think that the impetus for me was that sort of end of that year at Carleton in that summer, I happened to be invited to go to a conference out in Vancouver Island.
Okay.
And it was being put on by an international group of youth entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And I met someone through the university who was looking for people with, innovative ideas, and I think the criteria was you had to be under the age of 30. And they brought together hundreds of young people internationally who were all starting their own business. Oh, that's amazing. I'll go.
How old were you at the time?
I would have been 22 years old.
Okay.
So I went out there, and this really motivated me to meeting all these young people from around the world. Motivated me to say, I can do this. Because you're looking at others and thinking, this isn't that daunting. And I always lived by this motto, and I said, what do I really have to lose?
Yep.
Right? I don't have anything to begin with.
Right? Yeah.
So, rather than, and this is what happens to people in life, my theory is that, when you get married and have kids and you have a job and suddenly you have a pension and, your motivation suddenly starts to diminish.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought at the time, geez, I don't really have a girlfriend. I don't have a job. I don't have any expenses, though.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's a big one.
If I could get into this without requiring any major capital, why not?
Yeah.
So that was really the jumping off point, is to say, okay, you know what? And I remember thinking, geez, if I could clear $100 a week, I could actually live.
Right. Yeah.
And that was my motivation in 1984, to be able to clear $100 a week.
Yeah.
To pay my expenses.
Just get it done.
And within 6 months, I had accomplished that, and we then got into an opportunity to do these murder mystery evenings, which became like a form of dinner theater.
Right.
And it's still going today.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you still involved in it, or?
I sold my interest in the business in the early 90s.
Okay.
So, about 8 years into it,
right.
I got into the restaurant and nightclub business.
Okay.
But my partner, who bought it, is still operating it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What's the company called?
Eddie May Mysteries.
Eddie May Mysteries. So definitely check that one out, because that's incredible. Talking to AJ when we first got here, he was showing me the building, and just from the conversation that we've had and the little bit of research that I've been able to do, one of the things that stands out to me most about what you do is how collaborative your thought process is. Do you know where that comes from?
I think that I've always developed this sense of creating opportunities and playing into people's natural inclination to want to influence things and influence change.
Mm-hmm.
When I thought a lot about this, but when you talk about people's motivations, people want to feel that they make a difference. And that's a big motivator, not just for me, but for many people in the workplace, right? And sometimes it's not that they're moving molehills or anthills or mountains. It's that they're just making what they're doing makes some difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the opposite, in that they feel they're not making any difference. And going to work makes zero difference to anybody at any time, is also such a motivation killer.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always played into this notion that everybody really wants to make a difference. If you
How did
give
you
them
learn
that,
that? How did you learn it?
just through experience.
Yeah.
Just
It was something you just noticed?
Noticed, and also I always that's always been a big motivator for me. How can I influence change in a positive way, right? Because you want to go to work, and at the end of the day when you go home, it's much more satisfying to say, you know what, I got something done. And sometimes it's not even like, oh, we have a new policy, an HR policy.
Right.
Sometimes it's actually, I built a table.
Right.
I get the same satisfaction of working at the cottage.
That's so funny, because literally into Christmas just did the exact. It was like, I've got nothing else going on. My wife is doing like the mug I gave you. My wife does heat pressing and stuff like that.
Right.
And went out and bought some wood, and it's not a thing I do. And I was like, that was the most accomplished I've felt most of the year.
Right. But if you play on that idea. I'm not a carpenter,
right.
But I do go out and take a chainsaw and cut wood and stuff. That's a really satisfying feeling.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when you're going to bed and say, "Wow, I cut a cord of wood today. I'm tired,
right.
But I feel good."
Yep.
So how do you translate that into
an
whatever
actual
line of
fun,
work that you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been fascinated by that.
How early on?
You know what I'm going to say, 10, 15 years ago, sort of getting into the middle of stuff in the Bluesfest and stuff, I realized that, there's nothing wrong with change.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be able to motivate people.
Yeah.
So give them an opportunity to make sure they can make a difference.
How much did sort of locking into that mindset change the way you did business?
The one thing I'll mention, which actually is an interesting story, is that very early on in the Bluesfest evolution, probably, I don't know, late 90s, I started going to conferences, and I've always been a big believer in professional development, going and seeing other people, seeing what they do. I ran into this guy who ran the Philadelphia Folk Festival, which is, they call it, I think, the longest standing folk festival in North America.
Wow. Okay.
Like 50 some years.
Right.
And I remember sitting and listening to this guy talk, and he was saying that they have their volunteer party in an arena in Philadelphia. I go, how many volunteers are you going to get? Thousands. Like, we have 6,000 people who show up to this thing. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And the first thing I always thought when I started was, oh, well, volunteers, they want to get in for free. You know, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't let everyone. And this changed things, because this guy said it's actually the opposite. The more volunteers you have, the more people are going to be willing to pay, because those are your ambassadors. That's your marketing machine. Because all those volunteers have friends and families and cousins who they're going to be your best ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
And all those people are going to buy tickets. So the goal should be to get more volunteers. So we started on that road. I thought, like, light bulb moment. Let's get more volunteers. We built a volunteer base of over 5,000. Okay, very quickly. And
well, I'll tell you what. I had breakfast before I came over here this morning, and happened to run into a guy. One of the first things is, because I've been talking to somebody, mentioned I was interviewing the Bluesfest folks. It's like, oh, I volunteer at Bluesfest every year. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So what this guy was saying was very true.
Mm-hmm.
But what he didn't say, which is just as important, is it can backfire if you don't give those people meaningful work to do.
Yeah.
And so what happened is we went out and recruited all these volunteers, but we weren't ready for them.
Gotcha.
And what happened is a lot of people got turned off.
Because they're standing around doing nothing all day.
Showed up, what do? I don't know, go over there. You know, so again, the next few years was really developing this sense of, yes, people will volunteer, but unless you give them a feeling that they're making a difference, they're not going to stay.
It's important.
So that was also a light bulb moment to say, you know what, that really is the key here. You're going to get committed volunteers, but they're only going to stay if they feel they're making a difference. And people used to say, Mark, you don't need me. There's nothing to do.
Right?
So I'd say, go home.
Yeah.
You know, like, and that's been my philosophy ever since. And it's not just with volunteers, it's with staff, contractors, everybody that works here, is that you really have to invest time, energy, and resources
Mm-hmm.
into understanding how you can utilize those people and give them the right motivation.
Do you spend, in thinking about all of the different kinds of projects in which this topic could sort of like rear its head, right? Do you spend more time coming up with things that you think will fit a person, or just allowing access to a person to come up with their own ideas and go after it? Does that make any sense?
Kind of a combination of the two.
Okay.
I think you have to, first of all, there are things that need to get done. Like,
Right.
we have to market the festival,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But within that marketing piece, we have a really, strong marketing team, of which one member is very good at and has been studying recently digital marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is a science unto itself and an ever-changing. So the fact that we have someone who has an interest in that sometimes dictates us putting more resources and more money into that stream of things,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to someone who says, I don't know anything about radio, but I'll try it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you need radio, but if you don't have the right person, I'm not going to say, hey, bloody well better learn this, and let's. So I feel you got to look at your team and say, where are our strengths? And if you don't possess the strength, go out and find someone that can deliver it for you.
100%. Talk to me about the early days of Bluesfest. How did it get started with you?
Well, in the early '90s, I got into the nightclub business. There were a couple of partners, and we had a club on Elgin Street called the Penguin.
Okay.
And we got in there in 1989. We ran it as a live music club for about 6 years. And it was interesting at that time because people in Ottawa in the music scene always talk about Barrymore's. And Barrymore's was the place where U2 played and Tina Turner, and those early crazy times or nights when these things happened. Barrymore's had just gone out of business around 1990, 91, and one of the original owners, Gord Rhodes, was tinkering around looking for something to do, and he had landed on my doorstep and said,
"What were you doing? What were you running?"
So we had started this live music club in Elgin, and it was about a 400 capacity room.
Okay.
And I had never booked bands before.
Oh, so you weren't like a club at this point. You were just kind of open. We
were open, but long story short, we had started as a dinner theater.
Oh, okay. You were building off of the old.
and that didn't work.
Gotcha.
Okay, and about 8 months or 10 months into it, my partner said, "Hey, Mark, this is not working."
Mm-hmm. So, we got a problem here, boss.
So I said, well, let's try doing live music, live bands.
Right.
And that's when this Gord Rhodes guy came along from Barrymore's.
Okay.
Said, "Hey, Barrymore's, we're tapped out. Why don't I come in and promote shows at your place?" One of the guys that started the Rainbow also had a bad kind of situation, and he landed on my doorstep. Right. Okay. Same sort of thing. Like, we know all these people.
Yep.
We don't have a place to put on these shows. So they both came over, and they essentially taught me the business. They introduced me to all the agents, showed me how to do the deals, gave me insight into what the best acts were. And
I like the story, and what you're talking about is really important. I want to get to it, but there's a piece here that we're skipping over that's just irritating me. Because now this is the second story that has basically been like, everything I do in my career walked in the door and came to me, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it. There's more to it there. There's a piece missing there.
I think that the piece missing is that I seem to be able to take the best of what these folks had, mm-hmm. and avoid the pitfalls that ended their situation where they were.
Gotcha.
So came up with a business model that would avoid, ending.
So you were they were coming to you with the basic idea, but you were able to take that idea and kind of like polish it.
Yeah, and kind of say, why didn't this work? Mm-hmm. In the end, you ended up booking too many bands or not doing the right deals and losing too much money, so you couldn't continue. So I was always thinking around thinking, well, why did that happen? How can we do a better deal? And what's the motivation of the artists and the agents and all this, which is what was missing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, all these or most of these bands and the rest of the industry just want a place to play.
You seem, I think, myself included, I think for people who don't know you and know your story, and they think about the Ottawa Blues Festival, and because you're involved in a whole bunch more than just the Ottawa Blues Festival, but if they think about what you're doing and how you operate, I don't think they would understand the part of you that is mostly doing what you're doing because you're really interested in getting other people to do what they want to do. Do you have a perspective on that? Like, is that how you think of yourself?
Not really. I mean, I think of myself as a problem solver.
Okay.
And honestly, I don't know if when you walked in here, I don't know if you wondered what the board was, but the board outside my office is where people come and write their name on the board. They want to see me. I don't have any appointments.
Mm-hmm.
So if the staff in the building want to come see me, they write their name on the board, and as AJ knows, when I'm done with someone, I go out and see who's next.
Right.
And generally, those people are coming to me with problems.
Okay.
Mark, what do we do? We have this potential sponsor, and this is what they're looking for. What, how do we do the deal? Or agent just called, wants us to book so and so. What do you want to do? I mean, it's just an ongoing, and so I consider myself a problem solver, or being someone who's has good judgment and common sense across a wide variety of different scenarios. It could be everything from accounting and business management to booking the Foo Fighters.
Right.
And applying the same sort of thought process to them all.
And that's kind of where I'm getting at, that is what you do, right? You just kind of take that idea of motivating, because it seems to me that what you do best is motivate other people to do what they're already, like giving people the motivation to do what they want to do anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And also trying to be a good manager.
We might have just said the same thing using different words.
Right.
Is that just a thing you developed and learned just because of what you've been doing, or was that a thing that was intentional for you?
I think it was just developed over time by trial and error.
Yeah.
And many of the things that happened at the Blues Festival, honestly, were developed that way.
Yeah.
Trial and error. The errors never amounted to, I read a book once called The Black Swan.
Yep.
I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but,
yep.
Supposedly there is a black swan. There's not many of them.
Right.
But a black swan event is the event that does you in. In other words, it's so rare, okay?
Because you can't redo it.
You never want to have a black swan event. And that's what I've been able to avoid, okay? Over all these years.
That might be the most brilliant piece of advice I have heard in any interview I've ever, because at least I do, always think about it the other way. Always trying to create that one thing that's just so unique.
You don't need to do that. You need to do the opposite. You need to create all these things and go along and learn from those mistakes you make,
right.
But never make the big one.
Right.
Because the big one does you in.
So talk to me, because we're going on, 21, 22 years now?
25 years.
25 years now. Okay.
Yeah.
So there had to have been a couple of ups and downs along that course.
Yeah.
What was the hardest one to get through?
You know what? I would say there were, in the first sort of 5 to 7 years, it was a real struggle, just financially. There was no money to pay anyone. I wasn't making a living at it.
Right.
Most of the time I wasn't getting paid. It was just trying to get the formula right.
Mm-hmm.
Get the formula to where you had an audience that was willing to pay, and you were creating a product that people wanted to buy.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me was challenging. I'd say the biggest challenge shortly after that was we did a festival in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
We tried to mount the Toronto Blues Festival. We did it 1 year. Second year was canceled, basically for lack of ticket sales. And I'm going to say, in my sort of early, sort of optimistic world, what we're doing in Ottawa is really working. It's now in year 7 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, this is really working. And some folks in Toronto had approached me and said, hey, there's nothing like this in Toronto. I said, well, this certainly will work in Toronto.
Right.
Yeah. Whatever, 10 times the population.
Right.
And it didn't.
Why?
I think in part because we didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough years to build. You need sort of a few years to build an audience.
I mean, Toronto, they want it big right away.
Well, also in Toronto, everything is bigger.
Yeah.
So it's harder to get the attention. In Ottawa, by that time, geez, we were the big game in town. There's not many people who didn't know what Ottawa Bluesfest was. In Toronto, it wasn't like that.
Right.
No one knew what Toronto Bluesfest was. We went and we did it at the CNE grounds, okay, which again, central location, right across Ontario Place, and we just didn't sell enough tickets.
Yeah.
Toronto Star was a sponsor. We had full page ads in Toronto Star. And honestly, the other thing I'll say about Toronto is they have everything.
Right.
And so they can see every major touring act that's going through there.
Yeah, the festival itself isn't all of a sudden going to be the big draw.
It wasn't that special.
Right.
In Ottawa, it is special because there's a lot of acts that don't play Ottawa. It's not, the market that Toronto is.
Because I think even now when Toronto throws like festivals, other than like the SARS Fest, which was maybe one of those black swans, but other than that one, usually Ottawa's like festivals or music scenes tend to be almost like just big street fairs now.
Toronto has had trouble
Yeah.
mounting a festival. I mean, many festivals, Way Home, Festival, have all gone down, right? They're no longer anymore.
Right.
The ones that seem to be working, like Field Trip or our smaller niche events.
Yeah, Field Trip was the one I was thinking about, right?
But Turf, for instance, was a festival that was done, and we were working closely with Jeff Cohen and Collective Concerts.
Okay.
That was done and moved into September to coordinate with CityFolk.
Okay.
Couldn't stand up. Just wasn't. Like Collective Concerts is a really reputable, sharp company in Toronto,
Right.
doing concerts all year. They couldn't pull it off.
Just something with the market there, right?
Really tough to mount a successful festival in Toronto.
Have you spent any time contrasting what throwing a festival in Canada is like versus throwing it in the US?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen many festivals, gone to visit them. We have a very active network of other festival promoters. Milwaukee Summerfest or Bonnaroo or Ostensibly Limits, as well as some smaller events, and in Canada. And honestly, there's no secret formula. Okay, but there are some key elements that I think are important. One is, first of all, building a local audience. Like, we're not a Coachella or a Bonnaroo where half or 60 or 70% of your audience is from out of town.
Right.
There are these destination events that are doing that. That's really tough to hang on to. Because every year you're asking people to travel. Many cases of long distance to come to your event. And now with the proliferation of festivals, a lot of chances to see those artists somewhere closer.
Right.
So that to me is a big challenge. So if you focus on a local or regional audience.
Do you think of yourself as a destination festival though? Because I think most of the rest of Canada does.
I think we are to a certain extent, but we have a huge local and regional following.
Okay.
It really supports the event.
Well, and in that vein, actually, I was talking with AJ before we came in here. You guys really involved the local music scene in your festival too.
Right.
Like really involved them.
Right.
You want to talk to me about the mindset behind that?
Yeah, again, along the lines of what makes a successful festival, what I've seen in traveling around is often the afterthought is, oh, we're going to have some local bands. That's something that we've sort of flipped around and said, look, we want to make sure that there's a minimum number of local acts.
Right.
In our case, about 50, okay, that are all going to get paid. And we're going to develop a criteria and make it a part of our mandate to help promote the local music scene. And give them some decent slots and give them exposure and a chance to meet other artists.
Why was that important to you?
I think it was important because many years ago, I remember talking to a local artist who I'd known since my Penguin days. And I remember talking to this fella, and this is probably 10 years ago, and him saying, Mark, I'd really love to make it as a local artist, but it's tough. And, I'm lucky to make like $100 sometimes doing these gigs. And I really thought about that and thought, geez, why we should be paying these people more. Local artists, it's easy enough because in the early days there were always local artists, and still I'm sure some today, that would play for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
The whole basis of South by Southwest is the artists don't get paid.
Right.
Well, to me that's not right, right? You should be recognizing those artists, and they're not going to sell necessarily the $50 or $60 ticket on the Foo Fighters Day.
Right.
But they're still important. And they deserve to be paid. I mean, that to me changed things around at a certain point and said, we're going to pay artists, local artists, a minimum fee. They're all going to get paid. Not based on how many tickets they sold at the Rainbow last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt that the organization should make that a priority and try to elevate the local music industry.
Have you, because you were talking about statistics earlier, right? In your college study, in your new college studies, which is another topic I'm fascinated about. We're now talking about something that's very difficult to measure, and I wonder if you spent any time measuring. Can you weigh your return on that investment in any way with the local artists?
You know what? I do strongly believe that there is a return.
Right.
But some of these things either are not possible to measure, or the effort required is not worth it.
Right.
And I feel the same way, like in 1999, we started this Blues in the Schools program, which was a local residency program.
Mm-hmm.
It's still going today, 20 years later.
Yep.
And
you started that early on?
We started in 99, yeah.
Okay.
And it was started, again, on the basis that we had some extra money after 98 when Ray Charles was the headliner.
Okay. That was was that your big year kind of?
That was a huge year.
Yeah.
Like a real, again, moment to say, wow, this is, we got something here.
Changed some stuff for you.
And at that time, there was a lot of pressure from the group, at that time, the board and so on, to be a fundraising event.
Okay.
And we had given money in 96, a small amount of money for Habitat for Humanity.
Okay.
And I started thinking, and I went to the board and I said, well, why are we giving money to a charity that is unrelated to our festival? Why don't we create our own charity and actually start to create programs which could have value and an impact on the festival in the future? So in 1999, we actually registered as a registered charity.
Okay.
And that was the impetus for it. We started Blues in the Schools. And the notion on Blues in the Schools was that, you know what? Those are our future fans. And those kids who are in grade school, eventually, will grow up and maybe they'll come to the festival.
Mm-hmm.
That was the notion, and it was the same idea, right? Is there a way to measure this? Well, no, there isn't. There still isn't. But the way to measure it is by going around town and saying, you know what, I was a Blues in the Schools participant 15 years ago, right?
I was just going to say there is a way to measure it. Tell me about the stories of all the kids that have come up to you and told you.
But it's anecdotal, okay?
Yeah, a little more than anecdotal though, right? Like at some point when you get enough of them coming up, you start to feel like, oh no, okay, we did what we were trying to do.
Right, and you want that buy-in.
Yeah.
So it's not just Blues in the Schools. It's, the Blues in the Schools went on, then we started a program called Be in the Band, which was, hey, let's put these teenagers in bands.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of these things were like a step towards getting more involved and ingrained in the community.
Mm-hmm.
The local artists, the approach to local artists was the same idea. How do we build that support and show that we have a real commitment, a genuine interest, right, in the local community? If you can do that, those people, like again, that volunteer example, become your best ambassadors.
Mm-hmm.
And when you haven't got the perfect circumstances or the bands that everybody loves, you still have people going, I'm supporting the festival because they're good people and doing good things.
Okay, since we're on the topic of the festival, I'm going to hit you with the same question. This stupid conversation comes up every year, and I know you get the criticism, and I know we definitely get it back in Windsor, so I'm going to ask you the definitive question so that everybody can shut up about it afterwards. Why is it still called Bluesfest, man?
Well, 2 reasons. Well, first thing I say to people when people ask me that
is it shut up?
Do you remember, I asked people to name the 3 headliners of the very first year.
Right.
Okay. Buckwheat Zydeco.
Okay.
Clarence Clements.
Okay.
Neither of which are blues artists.
I'm just going to go like, all right, yeah.
And Randy Bachman.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which is a blues artist? None of them.
So your answer to why is it still called Bluesfest is we lied to you from the start?
Well, the point is, it started as a popular music festival.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1994, there were no Bonnaroos, there was no Coachella,
right?
There was no ACL. Those festivals, when they came along, really cast a light on this idea of the modern popular music festival. Because when we were starting Bluesfest, it was the jazz festivals across Canada, the major festivals.
Oh yeah, because in the 90s, the jazz festival scene was like a big deal, right?
They were the big festivals.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, well, okay, we want to do something that actually has popular music in it.
Yeah.
And rather than the popular music festival,
right,
Bluesfest.
It's just all blues anyway.
It was the anti-jazz.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of my points, and I would argue that we invested, time, resources into that name.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early 2000s, actually, I talked to the guys at the Montreal Jazz Festival, who I had developed a relationship with and was working with, and I said, guys, you're booking Annie Lennox, aren't people saying why you call the Montreal Jazz Festival? And Andre Menard at the time, who was one of the founders, said, yeah, Mark, he says, we've invested millions and millions of dollars in the brand of the Montreal International Jazz Festival. Why would we change the name?
Right. Yeah, because the second you put out a poster that has a different name on it, nobody knows that it's the same thing, but you change the name.
And that really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
People knew Bluesfest.
Yep.
So we're going to call it what?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and really that is the answer, right? After so many years, would you just up and start over again? Because that's essentially what you would do to yourself by switching that name.
And why?
Right? Well,
the people who
because there's people in their 50s and 60s who are angry on the internet.
Yeah. The thing that was also interesting, I think a turning point at some point, was that I realized that a lot of your detractors, no matter what you do, are not going to become your supporters.
Right.
So how much attention and how much can you allow them to dictate what you do?
Do you take it personal at all?
I did in the early years, but now I don't. And honestly, I always say to this, to the staff as well, I want to hear from the people who buy our tickets, not the people that don't.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we do a fair amount of surveys now, and we ask a lot of people. This sort of question doesn't come up anymore.
No?
But the people who don't buy tickets or haven't bought for 10 or 20, they want to stir the pot, which is fine. But, the people that support us, don't bother.
Yeah, at the end of the day, how much are you going to cater to not customers?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Talk to me about this building, because AJ just walked me through here, and you have the most incredible operation. Like my history with festivals, I understand there's a lot of work that goes into it and stuff, and a lot of people do it different ways. but this is the most elaborate thing I've ever seen to do. Like, but nothing is ever this permanent when it comes to music.
Right.
Yeah, so talk to me about this building.
Well, around 2012, someone said, Mark, did you read the Citizen article, the Ottawa Citizen local newspaper article, about this church in Westboro? And I said, no, and I looked it up. And there was an article in the paper which was about this building, which had been a United Church since 1915 or something. And the fact the congregation had amalgamated with another United Church in the area, and that they were struggling with what to do with the building. Mm-hmm. And I called up, found the name of someone in the article, called him up, and the guy I phoned was in his late 70s. He had been baptized here, got married here, and he was working with a group at the church to come up with what they would want to do with the building. And so he said, hey, why don't you come over? A bunch of people are coming through on Thursday morning. And I came, and we walked through the building, and it was like anyone would imagine, an older church, never been renovated. What was interesting is it had a bunch of outbuildings. They had built a daycare and a gym, and so it was sitting on a sizable parcel of land, about 16,000 square feet. And I ran into a local developer that morning who was also here, and I knew him. And he said, well, Mark, what would you do here? And I said, well, that's a good question. I don't know, let me give you a couple of days.
Right.
So we joined together with this developer, and we came up with this notion of creating a festival building. And it was clear that the congregation wasn't really interested in making a lot of money out of the sale of the building, mm-hmm. but they were interested in doing something good for the community. So, and a couple people on the committee were also very interested in music. And so we presented a proposal where the developer bought the parcel of land. The church sits on 1/4 of it. And he agreed to separate that off, sever it, and give it to us for $1.
Okay.
And we agreed to renovate the building and operate a music school along with, festival hub.
How many festivals operate out of here now?
Well, half of the main floor is called Ottawa Festival, so it's an association of, I think, 95 festivals, okay, that are members of that, as are we. And then there's probably 5 other festivals that operate out of here, like, can actually have staff here every day. Mm-hmm.
And pretty much all of the Canadian music industry walks through here at some point.
A lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Canadian Live Music Association is also downstairs, here in Benjamin. So yeah, it's become a hub for the community, and it's also a great place to work.
It's a really impressive facility, I got to tell you.
Thank you.
We are pretty much at the end of the interview. I've given you zero opportunity to actually tell people about Bluesfest this year. So why don't we take this spot? Tell them what you're excited about most this year coming up.
I think, one of the things I'm excited about is that we have developed an audience which is very diverse. And we've been a bit of a tug of war at times over who do we have to please here. And sometimes it's the kids, and sometimes it's the older adults. And I would say that I'm most excited about, I think, coming up with a lineup that sort of has an opportunity to please everybody, mm-hmm. and not piss anybody off.
Good luck.
So, but I think I always, and over the years, I've really stressed to people, is there something there for you? Mm-hmm. I know there's stuff that's not there for you,
right?
But is there stuff there for you that you can focus on? The biggest selling ticket we have now is a 3-day pass.
Right.
Out of the 10. And I always say, are there 3 days you can find something on? And the fact is, there's a lot of 3-day combinations. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a measure of success.
Gotcha.
So,
what does the future hold?
I think there's so many great things happening in Ottawa. Light rail is coming on board this year. There's a whole development that's eventually going to happen at LeBreton. We'd love to be part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And just the music scene is amazing what's happening now. Also a member of the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition, which is a relatively new organization the last few years that is really doing a lot in the local community to promote music. And so it's an exciting time. I think the future for us is to continue to be at the forefront of, bringing people out in the summer, but also the other things we're doing, whether it's CityFolk or the Festival of Small Halls. We started a new event in February this year. Just, there's lots of great stuff happening in Ottawa. We can continue to develop that.
Dude, it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thanks.
I cannot wait to see the Bluesfest this year. It'll be my first one. I tried to get down last year but wasn't able to do it, so I'm really excited for this year. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you for sitting down with us. Ladies and gentlemen, that is this episode of the AVB podcast. Of course, there's going to be some videos that will be popping up on the side right after that, and there are always links below to our guests and us and all the other happy stuff. Talk to you later. See you next week. That'll do it for this episode of the AVB podcast. Don't forget you can subscribe to our full audio episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you find your audio podcasts. The full episodes, highlights, and our live off-the-floor performance videos can be found at our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the AVB Podcast. Of course, you'll find links to our incredible sponsors and this week's guest in the description below. The AVB Podcast is part of the Border City Network. Find more great content at bordercitynetwork.com. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.